So welcome to everyone to 2014 now, and this is our first show of the season at GPVWC here. We're going to be carrying this on after every week that we've got races in our career ladder here, and this time, alright, the whole lot hasn't started yet, but we have started off with the Super League, and we've got a Super League test to discuss. So now we will be covering the Super Cup and the Formula Challenge during the season, but that's still a good few shows away yet. Super League, we've had a few changes this year, which we'll start to discuss as the show goes on, and over the next 3 tests as well. We have lost Halcyon and Constant from the grid, but we have gained CSG, Torrent and MyVod Ball Team. So now this year, also with a few changes to the league, we've also changed our show. Not by much, I'm sure you'll be probably sad to know, but the format is the same, but we've got more guests than last year. So Mr. James Kirk, as always, is present by my side, but Lewis is unavailable this season, so we've got a guest panellist each show. And this show, we've got the main man, the new Super League team CSG manager and league admin, Mr. Dave Carr-Smith. So welcome, James and David.
Hello.
Evening. Bit of a downgrade.
Ah, don't put yourself down, Dave.
Who else could
It's
we
a
have on for our
sidestep.
first show? Got the head honcho
It's
on.
Dave.
Well, not the head honcho, sorry,
Everyone
but
knows
near
Dave.
enough.
Yeah, you
Everyone.
couldn't quite get the top.
No, we'll work for that for next year. See if we can get him on at some point. So I mean, all we've had this time is the obviously the Super League test, which happened on Thursday, which we can talk around the houses about it forever. But do you guys think we can actually, draw anything from these lap times, from the way the teams worked, from the the guys that drove for them? And we had a few last minute drivers thrown in as well, by the looks of things. Can we read much into it from this?
I think the one thing that really strikes me is you can so easily tell when people are sandbagging. I mean, we've got the likes of Paresis, Miller, Fider, Redshaw, Gaia, Casa, all that lot down the bottom of the table. They were there just to do laps and get R&D points. It's so blatantly obvious. Maybe we can take sometimes as true. I think Van der Voort, possibly in and around where they should be at maximum speed. But yeah, at this early stage in the season, there is absolutely no way to tell what the running order is. I don't think, anyway.
And bear in mind, yesterday as well, we had a lot of rain, so some of the times aren't representative compared to dry running that the likes of Tom and myself had at the end of the day.
That's a very good point. Yeah, obviously the weather plays a big part, and that's slightly changed this year, isn't it? Where we've got now almost a real-time system, would you say, Dave? And that it's linked up completely, and whereas before it was almost a slight randomisation to it as well. This gives a bit more of a strategy to it, I believe.
More or less, it's a bit more realistic. It doesn't rely on me to do, so I can't be blamed for it, which is nice. But yeah, it means that teams can look at a weather forecast, such as the one that we're using on AccuWeather, and get an accurate prediction for what's going to happen over the course of the day.
Yeah, so we could see quite a few, potentially different strategies. We might, obviously for tests it doesn't matter that much unless we had some rather large monsoon weather or something that would cause people problems actually completing the laps. Obviously we should say sort of everyone had to have done a certain amount of mileage this time, rather than, so it means actually for Imola it meant people having to do a few more laps than last year. Was that on purpose, as it were, to make people do more laps, make it harder to get R&D points?
Not really. Originally we wanted to do the 750 kilometre limit per team, give them flexibility and perhaps create some variation in how teams went and got their RD points, but ultimately that wasn't possible, and so it kind of defaulted into this 250k limit per driver that we saw yesterday. It's not changed too much from last year, but the focus is very much on pre-season now, as opposed to free practice that we had the past 2-3 years.
We should say, I suppose, we had 41 drivers on track on yesterday. You'll see on your screens now the times, which you can read into, and the amount of laps as well. You can read into what you did there. The person who did the most amount of laps, we did an outstanding 152 laps was for the Kerno was Miller on his return as well, must be said. There's quite a few people that have changed. We haven't gone through who's here yet, but that was by far the most amount of laps. But the bare minimum, most people around the 50-ish mark, which was the minimum they had to do really. Only one team missing the 3-driver rule, missing the percentage, which was ST, which is a shame, but I'm sure we still got to see 2 of their drivers out and about, so there's quite a few around. You think everyone's going to be sandbagging for the next few ones as well? Is this because we don't want people? Is this just because it's the most efficient way of doing it, or is it because we don't want people to see the real speed? I mean, I kind of direct this at Dave as well, considering your 3 drivers were in the bottom 5 drivers, but we know they're not slow. Was it a cost saving, or was it kind of cloaks and daggers type of thing?
Mostly cost saving. We found it doesn't even save that much. I think it worked out. We saved about 3,000 compared to teams that split it into 2 runs. But the aim for yesterday, for us at least, was to get all of the laps done in 1 run. And whilst the tyres weren't an issue, you really had to back off and save fuel, which is why you see David Lewis and Fine all the way down there. They had to meet a lap time to be able to get the fuel mileage they needed.
I mean, the one we did see was Casa in the Torrent. I mean, he's actually near enough at 2 minutes doing a lap. Would you think that's... he went around with the pit limiter on at one stage. It's not great to watch, and I'm sure the fans wouldn't have liked it, but is that dangerous doing that? Like, actually for everyone else out on track? It's an extreme measure just to be able to save a bit of fuel.
As long as he gets out of the way, there's no real need to criticise him for it. He's saving fuel, which saves money, which in the long run could help Torrents, and especially with a change to a Trinity engine. You've got a new way of thinking at Torrent as well, new ideas banded about, and perhaps Casa could have got a bit faster, but you can't really say that what he was doing was wrong by any stretch of the imagination.
It's not wrong, but he wasn't really saving any money compared to the other teams that did it. If you look at Jim was on the exact same program as Petter, and he was some 30 seconds quicker. As long as he gets out of the way, it's fine. It's just a bit of a waste of Petter's time.
Yeah, I'd always find, I mean, being a team member myself, also, we did have the debate as to whether to do, literally 1 stint and keep it slow and do it as it is. But I just, if I was the driver, could I be bothered? Would you do it? Test, we've got 4 tests for pre-season. If you did it for all 4, I think you'd be out of your mind by the end of it. I mean, obviously, Dave, you obviously did drive in the test as well for Norgen, but you didn't do the sandbag treatment, as it were. Is that because you weren't told to, or just wanted to have a good drive around?
I wasn't told to. I don't think we'll. As I said before, you don't really save much. So if you want to do it, fine, but it makes it incredibly boring for the drivers. I struggled enough to do the laps I did, and I was battling with Van der Waal for most of it just to keep things interesting.
So for the next test, we'll obviously have a bit of R&D going on potentially, I suppose, with the points spent from here. Will that be when we'll start seeing a bit more difference? Is that when it might come into being a bit cloaks and daggers, or will we actually get a chance to see who will be who potentially moving in the right direction?
I think the teams that sandbag are always going to sandbag. Not going to show anything until you get to Melbourne. You may see some teams start to improve as R&D comes out, but I'd be surprised if anyone brings anything major that could alter the pace in a big way before Melbourne. I think pre-season testings mostly this year is going to be used for gaining RD points rather than going for the lap times.
Must say though, guys, it was just good to know the cars are out there again and we're 1 stage closer to the start of the season. I think that was what was more exciting to me, really, like you say, other than watching the times themselves. But in the meantime, anybody, whilst you guys were out and around on track and seeing things going on, or just seeing the times or anything like that, anybody new or anybody that you think is already looking alright?
Well, I think the newest addition to the Super League this year, which has sort of caught everyone's eye, is the new Hawkeye signing of Georgia Baldi, who obviously, if you're within GPVWC, very much within this circle, you might not have heard of him, as was the case with me until I was informed after people were shocked that I hadn't heard about him. Very talented driver from what we know, especially in tin tops, but very fast driver nonetheless. And Hawkeye, Rick Scott clearly think that the Italian is worth hiring and partnering to Harley Hamnet, and he's up there with Ranieri, with Dave, with Van der Voort, so you can definitely see that he's on the pace that was at least set at Imola, whatever you can take from that, if it was a fake pace or not.
Yeah, I think it's always. He caught my eye as well, to be honest. As I did know him from other leagues, not personally, but having seen him around driving as well, he's obviously got the talent there. I just thought this test was quite interesting because all the cars are equal at this point. But like you say, it's who's actually trying, who isn't. Anyone, Dave, caught your eye apart from yourself, obviously, in your team?
Nobody specifically. It's really difficult to tell, as we said before. But I was quite impressed that the field spread, especially over the top 30, is really quite low compared to previous years. I think the talent level within the field in general this year has increased a good bit.
Well, the top 30 are covered by 2.3 seconds. That's nothing. I'm pretty sure most races we were seeing 3 seconds, scattering one from last in most qualifying sessions and race sessions at least.
Yeah, and obviously it's difficult to tell, again, with the fuel loads and different things that people were doing. But it's encouraging. There's a lot of big names that are quite near the top anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've had the competition is going to be so tight this year. From a driver point of view, obviously the cars make a big difference in Super League as well. But I think that's very true from the Super Cup as well. Looks really competitive, and even the Formula Challenge is looking competitive now as well. Really does look like it's going to be a fantastic 2014 here at GPVWC. We've got some big names coming over as well from other leagues and stuff, on top of the ones we already had here, and it's really becoming a even better league than we had last year. We haven't even started yet. Should we go into a bit about I suppose with pre-season we can go into the drivers another time potentially. But what do we think? I suppose the biggest thing that people have done is sign engine deals. I mean, the idea of it seems to be that they're meant to make a bit of a bigger difference this year than last year. Do you see them being a sort of almost a game changer between certain teams this year?
I think the one team that caught my eye is Phoenix, who are the only team to have gone with a 2013 engine, and I think it's going to be really interesting seeing where they both start and end the season, because presumably the whole idea behind the 2013 engine is you might have a slight advantage over the 2014 engines at the start of the season, but then of course there's no real advancement like you will get with the 2014 engines, and so I'm pretty sure we'll see them tail off near the end, unfortunately. And also Martex and the Crevda engines not getting many customers. I think there was 2 Martex customers and 1 Crevda, or was it 1 Crevda? I think only Red Archer, and that was it.
Only Red Archer went for that one. Yeah. Obviously on top of as the works team as well, being obviously having 2 effectively adding to the points.
So only 3 customer teams between Crevda and Martex. You just got to wonder how that's going to affect all 5 teams involved. So you'd imagine that there'd be less input from all the teams, or maybe there will be more input or more concentrated input. Definitely going to affect them, though, that'd be for sure.
Especially when you consider as well that ST only had 2 drivers yesterday. That's already hurt Martex on day 1 of the season.
Yeah, behind already, and that takes quite a bit to catch up, I think, doesn't it? I mean, it is a long season, a long pre-season as well, but it'd just be interesting to see if that does make a bit of a difference. Whereas last year, I think we really saw the R&D make the difference for the cars, and not quite so much with the engines. But also get extra team this year as well, so that makes it a bit more interesting as well, with more points around the place. But I don't know. Well, only time will tell, I suppose, in that one as well.
Well, last year with the engines, obviously with it being a new feature, it wasn't something that we wanted to make overpowered. We didn't want it to be a season changer, where because of something we'd done, a team could run away with it. So it was by design not too effective. This year, now we know how it works and how the various things affect each other. I think we'll see a lot more sway with the engines as they develop. Going back to the Phoenix going for the 2013 engine, from the test that we did to balance those, I believe at the minute they've got about 6/10 advantage on any other car until the development starts.
Which could make it really interesting for race 1, actually. I mean, it is something that as a team owner I did have a look at. I'm sure you had a look at it, Dave, at some stage, but we obviously both decided not to go that route. But it's, especially with the money saved there for them, it could be a brilliant move in a way.
It is when you look at your alternatives as teams that don't have that many customers. There's a very real possibility that if teams keep missing these opportunities to gain engine development points, that the Phoenix 2013 engine could be unsurpassed by some of these manufacturers.
Which would be pretty incredible, really, wouldn't it? If you've paid out potentially £10 million more in some circumstances, and your engine might not be any better than that, you'd feel a bit aggrieved, especially if it's out of your hands. Obviously, that's the decision they made.
Well, I guess that's the risk you take.
Something to look forward to, though, in the rest of the season, because it'll take a little while, I think, for that to become apparent. But it'd be interesting for race 1, actually. Like I say, if Phoenix are in some way ahead, a bit more power in the engine potentially, depending on the route some of these other engines go, I suppose.
You've also got to look at the drivers themselves, though. Just because the car has a 6/10 advantage, it doesn't mean that we'll necessarily be seeing Phoenix battling in the top 10, battling for podiums necessarily. I mean, they've retained their lineup from last year. They've got Boyd Bryson, got Kieran Ryan. Just how good of drivers they are in comparison to the rest of the field, it's going to be difficult to say whether they won't just pick up where they left off last season. And there's a very realistic chance that they might just be in the same place as they were in 2013. We just simply don't know. The car doesn't justify how far they'll get up the grid.
I mean, they did appear to be quite, not quite stingy, because that's the wrong word really, but almost with the R&D with that car to start with and stuff. So they might pay off this year if they've carried some R&D over. But those guys, they're no slouches, those two drivers. I mean, they might not necessarily be right at the top level, but there's nothing stopping them scoring some decent points this year, especially if the car's there and the engine's there for them. I just don't think last year they had a hope, really.
I wouldn't be surprised to see them getting some top 10s early on. The issue for Phoenix is going to come into, you've got teams like Midnight, Nijo, Torrent, even Hawkeye and Nords with Baldy and Canapina. I don't see them being able to break through that barrier and getting into the top 8 or 9 positions. But aside from that, there's no reason why they can't be best of the rest.
Do we think it's going to end up that way already at this early stage, that we're going to have almost 2 leagues almost within the Super League? You end up with like the guys that are finishing, the teams and the drivers that are top 10 week on week, and then, like you say, best of the rest almost, fighting over a few points.
It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, the top teams are the top teams for a reason, and if you look at the lineup this year, they've improved upon what they had last year. So there's no reason why they're not just going to be further ahead.
Well, yeah,
I would say I think it's worth potentially looking at those teams. So let's look at the ones in full trouble. Should we say trouble at this early stage? ST, Green Stripes, Red Archer. I'm pretty sure that all 3 of those teams, before even the 2014 season got underway, there was a lot of talk about, how are they going to do in this situation? What's going to affect them in this way? Red Archer, nobody had any idea who they were going to sign for this season until recently, and even then they still had trouble at the not the young drivers test, at the pre-season test. They had to drag in their old driver Jason Muscat to be able to bring in the R&D points. So we're looking at these three teams and thinking, well, what's going to happen to them by the end of the season? Could we potentially see them out like Halcyon and Constant from last year? Just no funds, no will to continue. There's a real trouble for those three, I feel, at the end of the day.
I mean, I think you were talking about Red Archer there. I don't think they're in financial issues. They seem quite healthy, actually, from what I've obviously not seen any actual books, but from the rumour mill, they seem okay. And obviously the driver that didn't turn up, Dennis Lynn, is a good driver. If they can get that car built, although like we said about the engine, they're going to have a bit of a problem there potentially. But actually, there's not that bad a team. You're probably right about Green Stripes and ST. I'd imagine are probably in a bit of trouble with. But although having said that, if anyone can just go with the right car and have the right opportunity, you can pick up a few points here and there. Although I know you're part of ST, James, but I can see them struggling this year.
Yeah, well,
even at this early stage.
Yeah. Without revealing too much, I'll say it's tight for certain. But there's always hope that we'll get to the end of the season and can build up from there. That's the thing. It's all about foresight and focusing, maybe not even on 2014, maybe focusing on getting to 2015 is the first priority.
Wow. Always that's sad to hear, Dave. You think when obviously being a league admin, you look at it and go, well, some teams potentially might not see the season out, and we haven't actually started the season yet.
In a way, yes, of course, but that's what the Super League is. You've got to plan ahead. You've got to look after your money. I think teams have been almost reckless with their budgets the past couple of years. It's been too easy to survive, and now we see teams this year in a situation where you're having additional costs placed upon you, such as the personnel and the increased fuel costs, and now we've got teams not knowing if they're going to be able to make it. And it's gone from a situation where they're doing very well financially and wasting that money to, are they going to make the end of the year?
Obviously, we've got 3 new teams as well this year, which we're both part of as well, coming up on them potential. Try, don't know about you, Dave, but my aim is to try and beat a couple of those teams. I'm sure you've got lofty ambitions as well. It's trying to get ahead of these guys if they can't afford the certain things, and obviously we're new teams, so we haven't got necessarily the budgets that some of the other teams will have as well from last year's. But do you think with some of these extra costs that have been added in, that they've been added in potentially a little? Some people have said it's been put in a little late, so that they've already done their planning and then they've been told there's a load more additional costs.
There's always an argument for that, but we wouldn't have added it if it was unaffordable by any team. It's not something we don't want to set out with the intention to bankrupt teams, so that's why things are still completely affordable. What teams need to realise though is that, particularly with this personnel thing, you don't need to have all of the best. There are ways to be clever about it and perhaps gain from having less.
Well, there's Dave's tip of the week, I think, there, for any of you managers that haven't bought your personnel yet for the other parts. Look into it closely, because it is an expensive. I mean, I was looking at it when it first came out, and I believe it was actually Nikos Red Archer telling me before I'd even looked at it, to me think it was like, if you wanted all the best for everything, it would cost you about £10 million or something ridiculous, which is, for the mighty majority of the league, is probably unaffordable, I'd guess.
Yeah, it's completely inefficient to have all of the best personnel. There's no logic to it at all unless you've got more money than sense, basically. I mean, as you buy more personnel, it plateaus off anyway. The gain that you see is marginal as you get to the higher numbers. So for any team to go out there and buy the maximum number of personnel is just wasteful. So I'd be very surprised if anyone's done that.
suppose we'll see what difference that makes as well. It's an extra. I love all the extra little features. Can we see any? We're expecting anything else to be added in the meantime as well?
Nothing new to be announced before this year. Obviously, we need the marketing and hospitality system still needs to be detailed, but that's not really something that's going to have a huge effect on this year. That's a feature that will instead have greater bearing on 2015 commercial bidding.
So that's not a way for these struggling teams to grab a bit of extra cash during the season.
Not this season. In fact, it's going to cost them a little bit more. But I'm sure they're pleased to hear that. But it will, if they play their cards right, help them increase their budget for 2015.
That's forward planning, isn't it? We're already talking about some teams struggling to make themselves through this year, and we'll have other teams already planning their budgets for 2015. It's I think this is what makes GPVWC. At the end of the day, we've been talking here about a test session that really has very little bearing on actually, other than gathering some points and for us to talk about. But you did this in many other leagues, you wouldn't have a thing to talk about, because this is just such a great experience almost for the drivers, managers, for the people watching. I know we're all part of it in some respect, but even just the outsiders, there's a lot of interest from the leagues below as well, which is great. Can't think it's any better. I think we'll wrap that up for this week, lads, because unless you guys have got anything else you want to bring up over the course of this test, we'll go through the full drivers lineups on our next sit down when our next guest as well. But anything to add? I'll take silence as golden. That's gone well. So yeah, we'll go through the drivers next time, because we've got Nick Rowland on as well. Obviously, Constructors Champions manager. So we'll see how they're doing after 2 tests. And then we've got guests lined up after each test going forwards, leading ourselves into the final test and practice races for the Super Cup and FC, into the first race in Melbourne at the end of February. So it's been great having Dave on as well to give a bit of insight into the, particularly with the R&D system and the whole Super League. And it's great to have James back, and great to be in this format really. Hope you all enjoyed watching. It's a bye from me. It's going to be a bye from James and a bye from Dave.